Hi guys, today we're looking at this Ferguson 3T18 boombox. This is from 1982. I've done a video of one of these in the past and it was just a quick look around the unit. It was a particularly nice one that I had, so we had a quick look around. I'll put the link in below. This one is another one that I've picked up, and they're getting quite rare, these. You don't see these very often. As I said in the other video, the good thing about these, the unique thing, is the build quality. They're very good build quality. They're built solidly. You know, it's all metal parts, but also the sound quality is really good on these as well. It's not the loudest boombox that you could get in 1982, but sound quality wise, it's really nice. Now this one has a problem with the tape deck. I've not opened it up yet. The radio function I've tested, so we'll plug that in now and you can have a quick look.
Let us pray.
Best charting single of the year. Do you remember? And if you don't remember this, look it up, it'll frighten you. Do you remember that Arthur Mullard and Hilda Baker also released a version of the song in 1970?
So one of the good things about this is the digital tuner. There wasn't a great deal of even hi-fi systems that had digital tuners in 1982, let alone portable ones. So to have the digital tuner on here is quite unique. You've got the VU meter level there. I have noticed that the bottom row of LEDs looks as though it's just not quite aligned with the front face here properly, so maybe signs that this has been opened before. We'll probably see that when we get into it. There's a little bit of damage on the plastic here. I don't know if you can see that, but it's just a little scuff there, and also on the metal there. But apart from that, it's in really good shape. The casing has yellowed a little bit, as you'd expect. I can show you that as well. If we turn this round, open up this compartment, you can see the difference there between the original colour, which was a grey, and this faded yellowy colour. So perhaps this is a candidate for retro brighting. I think it would probably restore that back quite well. But yeah, this is a nice looking unit. I do like these. So, like I said, the issue with this is the tape deck. What happens is you press play or rewind or fast forward and you can hear a motor turning, but nothing on the spindles. So I'm expecting it's probably just a belt. So let's get this open and we will take a look. There's a connector on the back here just for the aerial wire. Pull that off. And then the back comes off. There's nothing much in there, just the external aerial connector and the built-in antenna. And this is a look inside the unit. So there's quite a lot going on in here. This is the radio board, the tuner board. So the internal antenna here for the medium wave and long wave. The external antenna is for the FM. This is the digital tuner. I say digital tuner, this is actually separate to the tuner. This is just a frequency counter. So this is, you can imagine the radio is just a normal radio with a normal tuner. This is the variable capacitor there for the radio. And all this is doing is picking up the frequency of that tuned in signal. Then we've got, there's a Dolby chip there. It's got Dolby written on it. So this little board is the Dolby noise reduction. Again, another Dolby chip there. So perhaps that whole board is Dolby noise reduction. This board is the tape deck and the amplifier. So the amplifier, audio amplifier for the speakers. That'll be these two transistors and the pack on the other side as well on this heatsink. And then this section here, and probably the some of this section on this board will be the cassette deck. There's the shielded cables coming in from the cassette deck head. And then over here we've got the power supply. So linear transformer. We've got regulator board, some capacitors. So there's quite a bit going on there. Now we need to get the front off. I can't remember how I did that. So the front, once we get the front off, we'll be able to see this cassette mechanism, because at the moment it's hidden by quite a lot of stuff here. We can see the belt though. Not sure if you can see that there. This is the capstan belt. The belt actually looks okay, but it's quite stiff. It's not moving around freely, so perhaps there is some issue with the mechanism. We'll see that when we open it up. I know you've got to take the little door off the cassette, so let's do that now. Also got to take these knobs off. The other switches, they just stay behind when you pull the front off. So they're fine. Coming off from the bottom, feels held on at the top. Let's have a look inside. Perhaps this top piece does need to come off now. There's a little clip inside there. Right, with that off, the front's just become loose. Little connector there for the speakers. Disconnect that. That's our front panel. Speakers seem in good shape. I will take them off just to have a look at the cones, because what can sometimes happen with these, often the paper just deteriorates and becomes very brittle, so it just turns to dust. But these feel okay. Okay. And get our look inside the front now. It's the LEDs that I was saying didn't look quite right. They should be, the top row looks okay, but the bottom row is just sat a bit low. So I might take this metal panel off the front and we'll take a look. There are several screws holding this cassette mech in. Looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 it looks like. Which again is testament to the quality of this. 7 screws to hold the cassette mechanism in is a lot. Even the Sony ES systems that you buy, the hi-fi systems, they've only probably got about 4 holding the cassette mechanism in. So this is a well-built machine. It's just these cables to disconnect around the backside. So the good thing about this is we'll be able to connect this up whilst it's out of the machine. We can just put these connectors on and test this whilst it's out. It looks a bit dry in there, I'm going to say. Expect to see a bit more grease on these gears, so perhaps it just needs a re-grease as well. This belt though, and you can hear that. The belt doesn't seem too bad, maybe a little bit loose, but I'd expect it to work. But when we try and turn the mechanism, it's not working. So let's take this capstan out first. We'll be able to see what the gears look like underneath. There's no washer on that capstan. Normally when you take out the capstan roller, there's a little washer on there that does two things. One, it prevents the capstan from moving up and down, holds it in place, and also it stops any grease that's on the other side leaking out onto the capstan and invariably onto the tape. Well, there isn't one, so this should just come straight out. Large flywheel on that. Another indicator of a good quality deck is a heavy, large flywheel. The larger and heavier the flywheel is, the less prone they are to fluctuations in tape speed when you're playing. Something happens to the power, a little dip or a fluctuation in the power, which would slow the motor down. Because it's got this large moving flywheel, the speed is unaffected in most cases when that is just a small change in the speed in the motor. So yeah, that's nice to see. A lot of the modern ones have very small flywheels. Okay, well this cog doesn't look good. It's just flapping around there. So that is in the wrong place. I think there's a spindle missing from this. There's a little washer on the bottom, but there's nothing in it. Is that the top piece? Oh no, the spindle is in there. It's sprung loaded. I think I figured out what this part was. That was sat here and is driven from the cog which sits on the capstan. So that sits somewhere there like that, and this outer ring here drives the cog which was sat there. And what had happened was, just move this down. These are the parts of that mechanism that came off, and it's a clutch. And what had happened was the clutch is under sprung tension. This spring's in the middle, and the clutch all fits together, friction fit, and the spring then applies pressure between the two cogs. So one can turn, and the other one has a little bit of friction against it, and that is generated by this spring. And what had happened here was this whole part, this whole mechanism had blown apart. The spring had pushed it apart. The friction fit failed. It blew apart, and that's why it was sitting on an angle when I opened it up, and it was also pressing against the capstan wheel as well, the flywheel. These are all the parts from that clutch mechanism, and the way it fits together, you've basically got a clutch plate and a clutch disc that press together. So on the bottom of this cog, that plate goes on, so I'm going to call this the clutch plate, and this one here is the clutch disc. So it's just a piece of felt. It's a felt ring glued on there. Basically the way this works is these are pressed together under pressure by that spring, and it just creates a little bit of friction between the two. So they're always free to move, but with that spring in place, there's just a little bit of friction, and that's what this clutch is doing. So that's the clutch, and what had happened was the spring was basically blowing this apart, and the parts were touching the flywheel and touching other bits and pieces. Now I think it's come apart because it's worn. This is the piece of plastic that engages with this. This is the friction fit part. So if I push this together, I'll be able to hear that just fits together quite tight. Actually, I've just seen a crack in there. That's why it's failed. You're not going to be able to see this on the camera, but these two parts are meant to press together really tightly. and not come apart, and the spring sits in the middle of that, like that. What had happened was this is broken and the springs pushed the two pieces apart, but I've just seen now that there is a little hairline crack in the plastic, so that's why it's become loose. So to fix this, I think all I need to do is glue these two together. Put a spot of glue at the bottom there and glue these two pieces together. So what it's going to look like is this clutch plate and disc fit together. Spring sits in there, and then this friction fit presses down. Is meant to sit together. So that there now is sprung and it's together. But as soon as I move this, there, it's sprung out. It's not meant to do that. It's meant to stay in place. And that's because it's cracked, that piece there. So all I need to do, I think, is just glue those two pieces together, and that should be this clutch working again, I expect. So let me try that. I'll put this together now, and we will come back. The clutch is being glued together, and if you're doing this, what you should end up with is it obviously assembled together like this, but also that the two wheels turn freely like this. Now there is that resistance on there, which is what this clutch is meant to do. That clutch plate pressing down onto the clutch disc is creating that little bit of friction. That spring that was in there is under compression in here, so it's trying to pull this apart, which is what happened in the unit. So if you open up yours and you find that this has come apart, hopefully you find all the bits inside and you can glue it back together. So this needs to be fitted back in the machine. This rod goes in the centre and the washer on the bottom, like that. And then this whole thing fits into this little hole there. There's a hole underneath as well. It needs to go through both of those, so you need to align this top and push it down. Now again, this is a friction fit into this piece of plastic, so there's no retaining clip or washer on the bottom. This is just press fitted in, but of course there's no spring trying to push this out of there. This will just sit in there quite happily. Now before I do that, I'm going to service this mechanism. There is grease still on these components, but it is very sort of stiff, sticky grease. So I want to clean all this off with some isopropyl alcohol and put some fresh grease down. So especially, you can see here, this is the record mechanism. When you press the record button down, it pushes this bar up, which in turn pushes the record playback switch on the circuit board. And this is supposed to be greased and free moving, and this spring is meant to return it, but of course you see here it tries to return it, but it's very stiff. It's because of all this grease, nasty grease here. You can see it won't even scrape off. It's gone hard. So I'm going to go around this whole mechanism, clean all this off. I'm going to do it with some isopropyl alcohol and some cotton buds. Clean it off, all the gears, all the switches, and then lay down a bit of fresh grease. And then we can fit our clutch where it's supposed to be, and we can test it out. All of that old sticky hard grease is now removed from the mechanism. You can hopefully see that's all a bit cleaner now. Useful way of doing that, like I said, is just a cotton bud dipped in some isopropyl alcohol, and then just work it over the areas that have got the grease on to start with. What you need to do is actuate the mechanism, so each button here on the mechanism is going to trigger a different part, and anything that moves, especially metal on metal, then these are the parts that you need to clean up first and then replace with some new grease. So I've got some grease here. It's just from a car accessory shop, this. And what you're looking for is grease that is thick, not obviously not thick and old and sticky like the stuff that was on there. But this is just it's just normal lithium grease. You just take a little bit on the end of your cotton bud, and then just put down on the areas that, like I said, have metal on metal moving parts. So this piece here, for example, this moves up and down and slides against this back piece. So I'm putting a bit of grease on there. This part here has got the clutch that we've fixed. That'll rub against this area. Again, metal there. So not too much. You're just replacing the areas that had the grease to start with. This is the mounting frame for the record lever that was totally gummed up before. So I'm going to put a bit of grease on here. And then we can put the plate back. These are just little press fit metal washers that go over the top of the posts. And then the spring. And we'll see if it moves back into its correct position this time. That's better. The counter pulley here, so this is the counter for the tape counter, and there's a pulley here in the middle, and then it goes off to the spindle. So this pulley here was totally jammed up. Had to take this off and clean out all the grease that was in the middle of that. For some reason the grease, maybe it's been re-greased, because I've opened up a few of these in the past and I've never seen it like this. So I wonder whether this has been serviced in the past, maybe years ago, and a different type of grease has been used and it's gone like this. But anyway, I'm going to continue on with this, grease all these parts, and then we can get this fitted back in. So the service on this is complete. Re-greased all the parts here. Everything that moves, it's got some grease on it. It's quite complicated, this deck, even though it's nothing fancy. It's not auto reverse or anything like that. It's got a lot of moving parts. I've also cleaned the heads and the tape path. So that is all nice and clean. Pinch roller cleaned. If you're wondering, by the way, what this is, this plastic cylinder, this is part of the, well, it is the cushion eject system. I've noticed on a lot of decks, older decks, when I open them up, different manufacturers have different ways of dealing with the cushion eject. Everyone wanted a cushion eject. It always gives the impression of a much more higher quality item if the door doesn't just spring open. So if you press the eject on this, it starts, it actually, the cushion eject is failing slightly on this, so it starts to open nice. At the last minute, it thuds open. And that's because the way that it works on this one is it's got a plunger. So this rod here is attached to the door, and there's a plunger in this cylinder which is supposed to be airtight. There's a little screw on the back, and you can actually adjust it and make the cushion eject less or more effective, but it's totally closed at the moment. And just as it gets to the end of the travel, you can just see the plunger coming out there. It must be worn just at the edge, so it's not quite airtight right at the end, but not much I can do with that. Still kind of effective. So we can start rebuilding this now. First thing to put on is our repaired clutch. I'll just align those two holes up. Like I said, it's just a friction fit, that, so the spindle just pushes down into the plastic below. You can see that clutch working there, so the whole cog is able to spin together, both the top and the bottom. And then if the bottom is held or the top is held, the other part's still able to spin. So we can refit the capstan. Belt needs to go on before this is tightened down, as it needs to come past here. So I'll just fit that loosely in place. A little bit of grease on the top of that capstan. think that belt's touched some of the grease on the mechanism a little bit, so I'm just going to clean that off. So that's the deck back together. We'll just connect it up and give it a quick test. Just precariously balance this up. I've got my 3 kilohertz calibration tape. I will run this through the oscilloscope at some point just to check the speed. That seems to be okay. So let's get this refitted. That's the cassette deck refitted. Let's take a look at this LED display. Like I say, it's just looks as though that row of LEDs is just a little bit low. So take this panel off, have a look underneath. Everything's so well built on this thing, even this display grill here is made of metal. Well, I can't see anything wrong with it. Perhaps it doesn't just need bending up ever so slightly. Let's try that. Yeah, that looks better. They all look in line. Just give this a quick clean before I put it on. It's got a few finger marks on it. So the next thing I want to do is just take out these speakers, just check the condition of the cones. At the very least, I'll give the chrome center cap a little clean. Got a bit of dust in there, but the cones are in good shape. I might give them a quick blast of spray paint these cones just to bring them back to black. I've done that in one of my other videos where I restore a Hitachi boombox, and I show there how I spray paint these, and it doesn't do any harm to the cone. If anything, it stiffens the cone up a little bit. These paper cones do go a bit soft over time, so coat of spray paint on there puts them back to black and also stiffens the cone up a little bit, so the sound quality is probably going to be a little bit better after doing that. So I'll go and do that now, and then I will come back. This is what the speakers look like after a quick refresh. I think they turn out really well. Just clean the centres up, a bit of black spray paint, and they look almost new. You can't actually see them very well through these grills. Grills on this particular boombox, the holes are very small, so all you see is grill really rather than the speaker, but you can see that chrome cap in the middle, so shining that up will look better. So I'll put these back in the machine and we'll get it together and we can have a look at it. Always surprises me how complex the record button is on these old boom boxes. I've got another video of a hi-fi deck, cassette deck, which had a similar convoluted path for this switch. So basically all of these old boom boxes have a changeover switch. It's a long switch and it basically in pairs of contacts along that switch, and as the switch moves one way or the other, all of the pairs switch over, which is why it's called a changeover. So it changes from one pair to the next. But when the record button's pressed on these, getting the mechanical record button to press this physical switch is always interesting. So in this machine, the record button is on the front down here, and when you press that down, the mechanics make this bar, this is the one we repaired before and did the grease on, it makes that move upwards. And then as that moves up, you look underneath just there's a bar that it hits. So that's going up and moving that bar. And as it does that, that bar is then connected to another, there's a pivots here, and it hits the end of the switch. So this, as you can see the end of it there, you can see a bit there, that's the long changeover switch. But if you look at the sort of yellowish plastic that's sticking out the end, when I lift this bar up, it moves that physical switch. So, like I said, you'll see a lot of these in the 80s boom boxes and 80s cassette decks. When you open them up, you've got this changeover switch, and it's just funny how they have to route all the mechanical bits of that to the record switch.
about English for now and talk about English varieties, they overlap most of their rules, but then you can find these little points of difference. So we talked about negative words earlier on and where we put the negative word with respect to the verb. So if we talk about Tyneside English, so I'm originally from Newcastle and don't sound like it, but that's the variety that I heard around me when I was at school. And as well as saying, and it means...
So that is this boombox repaired. The only thing we needed to sort out on there was the clutch, which needed re-gluing. So I'm expecting that's going to be a common issue with that clutch. The way that split over time, just brittle old plastic, and it had failed. So gluing that back together has repaired that. I've also re-greased the mechanism, cleaned the heads, cleaned the deck, just generally serviced it up as well. There's this one done. So hopefully this has helped you guys out. If you've got one of these devices that you need to service or repair, if you've got any questions, leave them below and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next one.